5 million years ago, the earth was restless. She twisted beneath her crust of fire and stone, shifting her mountains like muscles, breathing through her volcanoes. The continents were not as we know them now. Africa was a great heartbeat of storms and light, a continent awakening under the slow hand of time. The forests began to retreat, as if the planet itself had taken a long, dry breath. Trees thinned into grasslands, shadows stretched longer, and the horizon grew wide enough to hold the dreams of something not yet human. The earth was changing her skin. Rain no longer fell as often. Where there had been green, now there was dust. Herds of antelope and elephants moved with the seasons, and predators followed them, sleek, silent, merciless. Amid the tall grass, something small watched them all, something uncertain. They were not beasts, and yet not people. They were caught in the middle, a fragile branch in the tree of life, bending under the wind of extinction and creation. We call them Australopithecus, but they had no name for themselves. To name is to remember, and they did not yet know how to hold time in their minds. Still, they began to look, and that, perhaps, was the beginning. In the golden heat of an African afternoon, a small band moved through the savannah. Mothers carried infants against their chests. Males searched for roots beneath cracked soil. Their hair shimmered in the light, and their eyes, dark, wet, filled with quiet hunger, searched for something more than food. They were learning to stand. The act was clumsy, brief. Their legs trembled, their balance faltered, but when they rose, they could see farther, over the grass, over danger, over possibility. To stand was to see, and to see was to dream. One female, not larger than a child, stood longer than the others. Her back straightened under the weight of sky. The wind moved across her face like a whisper of destiny. She gazed at the plain before her, endless, bright, merciless, and something stirred behind her eyes. The air holds still. She takes one step forward. It is not graceful, nor powerful, but it is different. The earth watches her, as if aware of what she has done. And perhaps in that single heartbeat, a boundary cracked between what crawls and what will one day remember crawling. Night comes like a veil of ash. Stars spill across the black dome, uncounted and eternal. The small band gathers beneath a thorn tree. They do not speak, not yet, but they make sounds of comfort, of nearness. The mothers rock their young. The wind hums a lullaby older than language. Predators circle in the dark. Hyenas laugh in the distance. The smell of blood, of fear, of life hangs heavy. The little ones press closer to their elders, eyes wide with reflection of the stars. And as they sleep, the earth turns slowly, her molten heart steady beneath the crust. Every motion, every breath, every trembling step is a note in the symphony of evolution, a music no creature yet understands, but all obey. Centuries pass in seconds. The grass grows taller, the rivers change course, and bones turn to dust beneath the soil. Yet, again and again, one stands. Then another, until walking becomes as natural as breathing, and looking farther becomes the instinct that will carry them beyond the trees. They no longer belong to the forest, they belong to the horizon. The earth, their mother, their enemy, their mirror, has changed her skin, and in doing so, she has changed them too. For in her shifting, she demanded adaptation, and in adaptation, she planted the first seed of wonder. In the golden heat of an African afternoon, she who stood first wakes before the others. The dawn paints her face in amber and gold. She looks again toward the plains, where shadows of beasts move like waves. The air smells of new grass and old bones. She doesn't know it, but her kind will someday name the stars, build shelters, paint caves, and dream of gods. All she knows now is this: to stand is to survive, to see is to hope. The wind passes through the tall grass, whispering across ages, and the earth listens, silent and patient, as her children take their first uncertain steps towards becoming human.
The sun had no mercy on that land. For every dawn that promised light, there came a hunger that bit deeper than teeth. The savanna stretched endlessly, a golden ocean of silence, where survival was a dance between strength and patience. The creatures who had begun to stand, those fragile shapes between ape and man, were learning that to rise was not only a miracle, but also a burden. Every bone in their spine carried the memory of trees they no longer called home. They had left the branches behind, but the branches had not yet left them. The first steps were agony. Their backs bent with the memory of crawling. Their feet were not yet molded for the flat earth. Each stride was an argument with gravity, a conversation between pain and purpose. They stumbled often. They fell, but they always rose again. The world did not wait for them. Predators stalked the grasslands, leopards that moved like shadows, snakes that struck unseen, vultures that watched with patient hunger. The Australopithecus learned to move together, to warn with cries, to guard the young. Every mistake cost blood. Every lesson carved itself into bone. One morning, as the mist lifted over the plains, a young male limped toward a fallen tree. His leg had been torn by a predator weeks before, but he refused to crawl again. He leaned against the bark, trembling, and tried to rise. His body shook. He pressed his hands into the dirt, pushing, failing, pushing again. And then he stood. The others watched, quiet. No sound of triumph, no song, just the breath of wind and the soft rustle of grass. Yet in that silence, something sacred passed between them, an understanding without words. Standing was more than a way to move. It was defiance. It was identity. Generations passed, slow as stone. The body adapted. Hips widened, spines curved, muscles thickened along the thighs. The hands, freed from walking, began to learn another purpose. They could touch, carry, grasp. They could hold a child or a stone. The earth was sculpting them, grain by grain, inch by inch. Each mutation, each scar, each tiny victory was a step along a path no creature had walked before. But evolution does not comfort its travelers. The nights were colder now. Fires were still a dream, something seen in storms but never held. They huddled together beneath the stars, their hearts beating in rhythm with the distant thunder. They didn't know it, but the long struggle to stand had given them something else: togetherness. They needed one another now, and in that need, the first flicker of compassion was born. One night, an elder fell and could not rise. In the world before empathy, the weak were left behind. But this night was different. A young female, thin from hunger, returned to the fallen one. She pressed against him, sharing her warmth. The rest of the group circled closer, forming a wall of bodies against the wind. No one spoke. There were no words yet, but something passed through their eyes: recognition. The old male would not survive, but in that act of staying, of guarding, they had created something that could outlive flesh. The dawn came soft and gray, and the elder was gone. The group moved on, but not before one of them touched his hand. That gesture was the beginning of memory. The seasons turned. Rains came and went, carving new rivers into the land. The grass whispered secrets to those who could listen. Those who stood taller, who could see farther, who dared to endure the ache of upright life. Slowly, walking became less pain and more rhythm. They learned to move as one, shadows flowing through the endless fields. But with sight came awareness, and with awareness came fear. From their new height, they could see predators before they struck. They could also see storms before they arrived, droughts before they starved. To see was both gift and curse. For the first time, the mind looked beyond the moment and saw danger everywhere. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the band rested on a ridge of red earth. Below them, the world shimmered, herds moving like rivers of flesh, clouds rising like mountains, wind bending the grass in waves. They watched it all in silence, and though their thoughts were still raw, something inside them stirred, a feeling they could not yet name. It was awe, the first faint echo of what one day would become wonder. At night, she who stood first dreamed again. She saw herself walking, taller, faster, freer. She saw her children's children running across lands she had never seen. The dream was not a story. It was a pulse, an instinct that whispered, "Move forward." When she awoke, the air was cold, but her body was warm with determination. She rose, watching the others still curled in sleep. Then she stepped into the dawn, her shadow stretching long over the savannah. Each step was uncertain, but each step was hers, and that was enough. Because somewhere deep within her, beyond instinct, beyond fear, a voice was forming, silent but real. Keep walking. By standing, they had changed the way they saw the world. By walking, they began to change the world
No longer
itself.
saw it as the end of the
struggle for
world, but
standing
as the
was
beginning
not
of
just the
countless
rise of the body.
unknowns.
It
For the
was
first
the
time,
rise
he
of
understood
awareness,
that the
of
future was
empathy,
not something
of the
to
first
fear,
fragile
was something
thread
to shape.
that would someday
And as the wind
become
carried the
mind
scent of rain and
humankind.
ash, the
Before
earth
the
herself
fire, there was hunger, and before hunger, there was fear. The earth had cooled once more, winds sharpened, grasslands hardened, rivers thinned to mirrors of mud. The creatures who once thrived in the forests now wandered across barren plains, searching for what little life remained. The nights were endless, long blankets of darkness, where teeth gleamed in the shadows. Thunder rumbled across the sky, but no flame came to chase away the cold. It was an age of survival, not yet of thought. And yet, within that endless twilight, something was changing. A young male, smaller than the others, wandered near a riverbank where a carcass lay half buried in the mud. The air was thick with rot, the stench of vultures and time. He reached out, curious, as others watched from afar. His fingers brushed against a stone, jagged and sharp. It cut him, and he pulled away with a cry, but then stared at the drop of blood glinting in the light. The world had taken from him, and now, by accident, he had taken something from the world. He picked up the stone again, struck it against another. A spark of sound rang through the air, chick, pure, bright, and alive. The others turned. They did not understand, but they felt it, the power in that sound. The young one struck again, until the stone's edge grew sharper. Then he pressed it against the carcass, slicing through flesh that his hands could not tear. Blood, heat, and survival blended into one revelation. The first tool had been born. He called out, not a word, not a name, just a sound from the chest, rough and low. The others gathered. They watched him cut, then reached to mimic. Soon more stones were in hand, and the dull rocks of the riverbank became instruments of transformation. The band ate that night. The marrow was rich, the meat raw and fierce on their tongues. For the first time they had stolen food from the jaws of the beasts that ruled them, and in that act something invisible had shifted in the story of life. They had begun to create. The fireless dawn, it was not about flames, but about awakening. Their hands began to remember shapes, their eyes began to seek patterns. They struck stones not only for meat, but for meaning. Sometimes the rhythm of stone against stone sounded like music. Sometimes it frightened them, but always it changed them. The sound became a language of its own, not yet words, but the first heartbeat of logic. The world watched, silent and vast. Predators still hunted them, storms still swallowed their shelters, and death was never far. Yet those small beings, those not quite humans, were no longer mere prey. They had teeth of stone now. Their minds were beginning to sharpen as well. A leopard leapt from the grass one dawn. Panic spread, but one female, holding her tool, struck back. The edge cut deep, and the beast recoiled. The others screamed, a chorus of terror and triumph. When it was over, they stood around the dying predator. The female breathed heavily, trembling, eyes wide. She did not know what victory meant, but she knew she had changed the rules of the world. Time passed, and the stones multiplied. Some were sharper, some broken, some carved by accident into curves that caught the light like art. They carried these stones with them, cradled them like memories. Tools became companions, the first extensions of mind. Children learned by watching, their small fingers tracing the grooves of the rocks. One day, one of them might strike a spark by mistake. Not yet, not now, but soon. The dawn was fireless still, but it was no longer dark. The nights remained cruel. Without warmth, they huddled beneath the bones of trees, beneath stars that seemed to whisper stories only they could not yet tell. Their breath turned to mist. Their bellies ached. But when they dreamed not only of food, but of control, of mastery. Something in their blood had begun to remember the sound of stone. Each rhythm, each echo, each sparkless flash was a promise that someday they would hold the sun in their hands. Far away, lightning struck a dry tree. For a moment the world caught fire. The creatures froze, eyes wide in both terror and wonder. Flames danced across the grass, devouring everything it touched, beautiful and deadly. They did not approach, not yet, but they watched, mesmerized. And in their reflection, the fire saw its future masters. The fireless dawn was ending, not with flames, but with thought. They had learned to shape, to fight, to share, and in doing so, they had taken their first step out of instinct and into imagination. No god guided them, no plan foretold it. It was born from hunger, from pain, from a desperate need to survive. And yet, within that struggle, there was beauty, the raw, unspoken beauty of becoming. As the last light of day fell across the plains, she who stood first sat by the river where the stones had sung. Her hands were cut, her body tired, but she held a tool now, a simple, sharp edge, shining with meaning. She looked into her reflection in the water, half beast, half something else. And though she did not smile, her eyes lingered. She saw herself, and for the first time, she knew that she was looking.
The wind had changed again. The earth, once warm and forgiving, began to harden under the weight of cold. The Pliocene sun no longer blazed without mercy. It dimmed, veiled by clouds that carried whispers of ice. The herds moved slower now. The air grew thin and sharp, cutting through bone. And the creatures who had learned to stand had to learn something far greater, how to endure together. Once they had hunted alone, snatching eggs, stealing meat left by lions, surviving by chance. But the land was changing, and chance no longer fed them. The animals they chased were faster. The predators around them were stronger. If they were to live, they would have to think, not as individuals, but as one. It began in silence. At dawn, the mist clung to the grass like breath. A small band crouched behind the rise of a hill. Below them, the plain shimmered with movement, an antelope herd grazing near the riverbed. Their bellies groaned, their hearts thundered. They waited. No words, no plan spoken. Only glances, gestures, a rhythm of thought older than speech. One moved to the left, slow as shadow. Another circled right. The youngest crept behind, clutching a sharp stone in trembling fingers. When the moment came, they burst from the grass as one. The herd scattered, a storm of hooves and dust. The band moved with purpose, silent, coordinated, relentless. When it ended, one animal lay still. Its breath was fading, its blood warming the soil. The band surrounded it, panting, eyes wide, not only with hunger, but with triumph. For the first time, they had hunted. The silent hunters were born that day, not through words, but through instinct reshaped by something deeper: unity. In the vast loneliness of the plains, they had discovered the strength of togetherness. Around the carcass, they shared the meat. The young ate first, the wounded were fed. No leader, no order, just an unspoken agreement, a rhythm carved by need. That night, they slept with full stomachs for the first time in many moons, and in their dreams, perhaps, something ancient smiled. The days that followed forged them harder. Their movements grew calculated, their tools sharper. They began to mark paths, stones arranged in lines, bones placed at river crossings, signs that only they could read. When one fell behind, another waited. When danger came, they stood shoulder to shoulder. And in this quiet alliance, the world itself began to bend around them. Yet every gift of evolution comes with a shadow. With cooperation came memory, and memory brought pain. When one of their own was taken, torn by a leopard or broken by a fall, their cries lasted longer now. They lingered where the body lay. They touched it, as if hoping to call it back. Something had changed inside them. They no longer moved on as easily. Loss had entered the world, and with loss came the first shape of love. Weeks passed. The hunters grew skilled, moving like wind through the grass. Their tools became extensions of their will, spears of sharpened wood, stones tied with fiber, edges that gleamed like thought. They learned to use the wind, to stalk from downwind so prey would not smell them. They learned patience, hours of stillness before a single strike. The savanna was no longer their enemy. It had become their mirror. And as they hunted beasts, they were unknowingly hunting something far more elusive, themselves. One morning, they found a new danger. At the edge of a cliff, another band stood, creatures like them, but different. Their hair was darker, their faces unfamiliar. For the first time, they saw themselves reflected in others. Both groups froze. No growls, no attack, just silence, thick as the earth between them. Then one threw a stone, not in rage, but as a warning. The message was clear. This world was growing smaller, and humanity, still unborn, already knew the taste of conflict. The cold deepened. Frost clung to the grass in the mornings, water turned to glass at night. Yet by fireless dawns and wordless nights, the silent hunters endured. They had learned not just to fight the world, but to shape it. Their footprints carved patterns into the dust. Their hands carved futures into stone. In their eyes, the glint of intelligence burned, unrefined, wild, but unmistakable. One evening, as the sun dyed red over the horizon, she who stood first sat apart from the others. Her body was old now. Her hands trembled, marked with scars from a lifetime of stone and survival. She watched the young ones prepare a hunt, careful, deliberate, fearless. And she felt something she could not name. Pride, perhaps? Or the ghost of understanding? They were no longer what she had been. They were something new, something that might one day remember her, even if they did not know how to remember yet. As darkness fell, the hunters vanished into the tall grass, shadows among shadows. Their movement was soundless, their hearts steady. The wind whispered over them, carrying no words, only promise. And in that moment, the earth knew. The age of prey was ending. The age of the hunter, of man, had begun. The plains had grown quieter, as if the earth herself were holding her breath. Seasons bled into one another, rain, drought, bloom, decay, and yet something unseen had begun to awaken inside the tribe. They had learned to move together, to follow the rhythm of the land. But beneath that rhythm, another pulse stirred, one that did not come from the sky or the soil, but from within. It began with an accident. A storm rolled across the horizon, its voice booming over the dry savanna. Lightning cracked open the sky and kissed the grass. Fire was born, wild, red, and alive. The tribe fled from it in terror. They had never seen such fury, such light. Yet, when the storm passed and the rain cooled the land, one of them, an older female named Luma, approached the ashes. Her trembling fingers brushed the blackened ground, and warmth pulsed beneath the soot. She touched the ember and drew back, eyes wide, not with fear, but with awe. That night, she dreamed of the glowing thing. She saw it not as death, but as life reborn from destruction. When she awoke, she searched for stones that sparked when struck. The others watched, confused, as she hit them together again and again, as if trying to recall a melody forgotten by the world. No flame came, only the echo of light. Yet the act itself was new. It was remembering. In the following days, the tribe began to imitate her. They struck stones together, made piles of dry grass, stared into the sky, waiting for lightning. They didn't understand why, but something in their minds told them to try again. Memory, primitive, imperfect, had taken root. The elders of the group began marking paths with bones, stacking stones near watering holes, as if whispering messages to their future selves. Here is water. Here is safety. For the first time, they were shaping time, not just living within it. One young male, Taro, was different. He had watched the lightning with eyes that did not only see, but wondered. When others slept, he walked alone, following the scent of burned wood. He collected pieces of charcoal and traced lines on rocks, crude marks, circles, lines, shapes. His companions didn't understand, but these were the first symbols, faint embers of meaning left for tomorrow. When a lion took one of their own, Taro made a mark for her too, a jagged cut in stone, deep and deliberate. Luma watched him, understanding in silence. It was grief, turned into memory. Days turned to weeks. One evening, lightning struck again, closer this time. A tree burst into flame. The tribe screamed, scattering into the tall grass. But Taro stood still, frozen between terror and fascination. The flames danced, and he remembered Luma's trembling hands. When the fire faded, he walked to the tree and touched its edge. Heat licked his skin, and pain seared his mind. But alongside the pain came revelation. Fire could be held, if only they learned its secret. In the following moons, their world began to change. They carried embers from fallen trees in hollowed bones. They guarded the glow through night, feeding it dried moss, learning how warmth could banish darkness. Around that light, faces looked different. Shadows played on walls, and eyes reflected the same question. What are we becoming? They began to gather around the flames, not just for safety, but for something deeper, connection. For the first time, their voices mingled in rhythm, their gestures became stories. The light gave shape to memory, and memory gave birth to imagination. Luma, frail now, sat before the flickering glow and whispered sounds that resembled names. Taro listened, repeating them softly, feeling their weight in his throat. The others joined in. Something fragile and sacred was being born, language carried by breath, wrapped in firelight. That night, as sparks rose into the black sky, Taro looked up and felt something stir within him, a thought, clear and sharp. We are no longer the same. The Pliocene had given them storms, hunger, and death, but now it gave them the most dangerous gift of all, the ability to remember.
The fire had changed them. Its glow no longer frightened, it defined them. Around its warmth, their nights grew longer, filled not only with silence, but with thought. They had crossed a threshold invisible to the beasts that still roamed the plains. Beneath the same stars that had watched them crawl, they now sat upright, eyes burning with questions older than language itself. When dawn came, the tribe no longer moved aimlessly. Fire meant they could choose where to stay. Beneath a cluster of trees, they built their first circle of stones, not for worship, not yet, but for gathering. Each stone was placed with intent. The act itself was profound. It was order against chaos, a geometry of belonging. Taro, now carrying a darkened stick from the first fire, used it to trace lines in the dirt. He began to map the river, the hills, the herds. The others watched, puzzled, but slowly they began to understand. Those lines represented the world. In his crude drawings, they saw a way to remember where food grew, where predators hid. For the first time, knowledge could outlive memory. As seasons passed, the world itself was changing. The Pliocene sun grew harsher, the rains more erratic. The land that had once been lush began to crack, and herds of strange creatures vanished beyond the horizon. But the tribe adapted. They learned to gather seeds that fell from the tall grasses, and one curious woman, Ama, noticed that when the rains returned, those seeds sprouted where they had fallen. Her discovery was silent at first, almost accidental, yet it would echo for millions of years. Ama began to scatter seeds near the camp before the storms,
watching them push through the soil weeks later. She didn't know the word planting, but her mind was reaching for it. Her tribe followed her example, returning to the same place to find food waiting. Without realizing it, they had taken their first step toward mastering the future. Nights grew rich with ritual. Around the fire, they placed objects, stones, bones, feathers, in deliberate patterns. These gestures held meaning only they could understand, the first symbols of continuity. Taro, Ama, and the aging Luma would sit close to the flames, marking time in their own way. Taro scratched a spiral on a flat stone, the path of the sun, perhaps, or a reflection of the stars overhead. It was not art for beauty, it was art for memory. When a child was born during a night storm, the tribe painted her body with ash and ochre. They whispered sounds, half words, half breath, over her tiny hands. The firelight flickered against her skin, and for the first time, Luma smiled through her age. She murmured in the new tongue. The tribe did not fully grasp her meaning, but they felt the weight of it. That night, the child's first cry blended with the crackle of the fire and the song of the wind. It was a new kind of dawn. In time, the tribe began to see themselves not as wanderers, but as keepers of fire, of land, of memory. They buried their dead near the camp, marking the spots with stones shaped by hand. Each burial was an act of defiance against the forgetting that once ruled them. Luma's passing came quietly, under a pale moon. The tribe placed her body near the fire's ashes, surrounding her with feathers, bones, and the stone spiral Taro had made. Ama whispered to the child, now walking, words she had heard Luma say long ago. "Do not let the light die." It was not a plea, it was a command. When dawn came, the child threw a handful of seeds onto the wind. Some fell near Luma's grave, others into the grass beyond. The gesture was simple, but in it lay everything: the memory of fire, the rhythm of life, the first seed of civilization. That evening, as stars shimmered in the cooling sky, Taro gazed at the distant horizon. He no longer saw it as the end of the world, but as the beginning of countless unknowns. For the first time, he understood that the future was not something to fear. It was something to shape. And as the wind carried the scent of rain and ash, the earth herself seemed to whisper through the trees. "You are my children, and you are learning to dream."
The wind no longer sounded the same. It carried with it the voices of generations, the whisper of seeds, the crackle of fire, the rhythm of footsteps that had begun to carve paths into the soil. The tribe was changing, but so was the land beneath them. Where once endless savannas stretched beyond sight, now rivers drew silver veins across the plains, and mountains rose like the bones of the earth, remembering their shape. Taro stood atop a ridge, watching the first light spill across the horizon. His hair was streaked with gray now, his hands hardened by time and memory. Beside him, the child, no longer a child, walked silently. She was called Aru, meaning dawn in their new tongue. Her eyes carried the reflection of every fire she had known. They moved together toward a place where the river bent and the ground shone red beneath the sun. It was there that the tribe had begun to gather stones, not randomly, but in a circle, like the one their ancestors had once built for warmth.
Only now the stones were larger, heavier, deliberate. They did not know it yet, but these circles would become the first memory of humanity written upon the earth. At night, Aru would sit before the flames, listening to Taro's slow, broken voice. He no longer told stories of the hunt or the storm. He spoke of before, of when they did not know how to make fire, when the stars were only lights, not symbols. The others gathered, silent, mesmerized by the cadence of his words. The firelight danced on their faces, and as the sparks rose, Aru felt something stir inside her. She began to hum, a low sound that swelled like the wind through the grass. It was not quite song, but it had rhythm, shape, and meaning. The tribe joined her. Their voices blended with the night, and for the first time, music entered the human world. The earth listened, and the stars seemed to tremble. In the following moons, Aru began to wander further than the rest. She marked cliffs with lines of ochre, painted shapes, hands, circles, spirals. She said the walls could remember what the tribe might forget. Taro watched her with pride and fear. The world had once been a place to survive. Now it was becoming a canvas of thought. As the tribe grew, they faced new dangers. The rains failed for many seasons. The animals they had once hunted moved far north. The rivers dried to trickles. For the first time, the tribe knew hunger not as an accident, but a shadow that stalked them year after year. Some wanted to leave, others to stay near the stones, believing the earth would remember their faith. Aru stood between them, torn between the memory of fire and the promise of the seeds. One night, as the tribe argued by the dying flames, lightning cracked in the distance. She took it as a sign. "The sky remembers us," she said softly, though none understood her words. The next morning, she led a small group toward the horizon, where the air shimmered with heat. They carried embers, seeds, and memory, everything their people had learned since the first storm. For days, they traveled through lands that seemed ancient even then, valleys carved by vanished rivers, forests turning to dust, caves where echoes of other voices seemed to whisper through the dark. Inside one such cave, Aru found paintings, old, faded, and unlike anything they had made. Shapes of beasts and hands, drawn in layers. She realized then they were not the first to remember. The earth itself had been keeping memories long before them. She pressed her palm against the stone and whispered a sound, half prayer, half promise. Then she painted her own hand beside the ancient ones, sealing her place among the countless lives that had passed before. When they returned to the circle of stones, Taro was dying. He sat near the fire, its glow weak but steady. Aru knelt beside him, showing him her painted hand. He smiled faintly. "The earth remembers," he murmured. "Now, so will we." That night, they burned herbs and seeds in the fire. The smoke rose in spirals, drifting into the night sky. Some said it looked like the stars themselves were being born again. From that moment on, the tribe began to paint their stories, not for beauty, but for continuity. They marked births, deaths, seasons, migrations. They recorded the movement of the moon, the return of the rains, the cycle of life itself. The cave walls became the first archive of the human soul. At night, as generations passed, The meaning of the marks blurred, but their essence endured. Long after Taro and Aru's tribe vanished, the wind still whispered through the stones, carrying a single truth across time. We were here. We remembered.
The wind had softened. The world, once a raw and untamed expanse, now carried traces of memory. Fire-blackened stones, painted hands on cave walls, the faint scent of seeds scattered by forgotten hands. The tribe had changed beyond recognition. No longer bound to endless wandering, they had begun to belong. To a place, to a memory, to an idea larger than themselves. But beneath this stillness, something deeper stirred. Something that no storm, no hunger, no predator could destroy. It was the beginning of the human spirit. Aru, now old and slow in movement, but clear in gaze, sat near the fire as dusk fell. The flames shimmered against the walls of their cave, illuminating generations of painted forms, spirals, suns, beasts, and hands. She saw not merely color, but a language of the eternal. These images were not just of what they saw, but of what they dreamed. That night, the tribe gathered. The fire crackled softly, and Aru's voice rose over the embers. Her stories had changed over the years. They no longer told of danger or scarcity, but of creation, of stars that breathed life into beasts, of rivers born from tears of the sky. Her words painted visions brighter than the flames themselves, and the children listened wide-eyed, the flicker of light dancing across their faces. For the first time, the tribe's stories did not end with death or hunger. They ended with hope. When her tale was done, the youngest among them, a boy with dark eyes and a restless spirit, whispered, "Where do the stories go when we sleep?" Aru smiled, her voice trembling like the wind through tall grass. "They travel," she said. "They go to the place the fire can't reach, to the place where we become dreamers." That night, as the fire dimmed, the tribe slept close together. The stars wheeled silently above, their light spilling into the mouth of the cave. And in the silence, something happened. Something no one could see, but all would one day feel. For the first time, a human dreamed of something that did not exist. The boy saw shapes of people flying over rivers, animals with faces that spoke, trees that sang when touched by light. He awoke trembling, not in fear, but in wonder. He tried to tell Aru, fumbling for words they did not yet possess. She listened, tears glimmering in her tired eyes. She knew what it meant. The mind of humanity had crossed its final threshold. They had learned not only to remember, but to imagine. Days turned to seasons, and seasons to years. Aru's tribe began to carve new symbols, spirals within spirals, marks that no longer described the world, but ideas within it. They began to dream of things before they existed, of walls that could shelter them from storms, of waters they might cross, of lands they had not yet seen. They began to shape the unseen. When Aru's time came, she lay upon the earth surrounded by her people. They placed her near the ancient stones, the same ones that had watched over her since youth. The fire burned low, and the boy, now a young man, sat beside her, whispering the stories she had once told. Her final breath left her lips like a sigh carried by the wind. The flames flickered, and for a heartbeat, the smoke rose in the shape of a spiral, ascending toward the stars.
Generations passed. The tribe scattered, following rivers and winds. Some would forget the faces of Taro and Aru, but none would forget the feeling of firelight on skin or the stories told beneath the stars. Across ages, across continents, their children would build from that memory villages, tools, songs, and dreams. They would name the wind, tame the earth, and carve their history upon it. And in every dream, every myth, every whispered story told in darkness, there would remain a spark of the Pliocene, the age when the world was young and the first dreamers learned to speak to the sky. As the night deepens over the ancient plains, the earth seems to breathe once more. The stars shimmer like the eyes of forgotten ancestors. Somewhere, in the silence between winds, the old voice of the land still whispers. From the soil you stood. From the fire you remembered. From the dream you became. And thus, in the quiet dawn of imagination, humanity was born.